bleeding, freezing, and utterly broke, a forgotten mechanic forged a motorcycle engine part from scrap metal to save a desperate Hell's Angel. He expected absolutely nothing in return. 12 hours later, 300 outlaws roared into his desolate camp to balance the scales in a terrifying, earth-shattering display of brotherhood. The Mojave Desert doesn't care if you're rich, poor, or somewhere in between. When the sun dips below the jagged horizon, the temperature plummets, and the cold bites right through to the bone. For Kai Pendleton, the cold was just another neighbor he had to tolerate. Kai lived in the rusted-out shell of a 1982 Airstream trailer parked illegally behind an abandoned diner off Interstate 40, just 20 miles east of Barstow, California, 10 years ago. Kai was the lead diagnostic mechanic at a premier custom motorcycle shop in Los Angeles. He had a wife, Sarah, a small house with a mortgage, and hands that could coax life out of the most stubborn internal combustion engines ever built. But life has a cruel way of stripping a man down to his studs. When Sarah was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer, the medical bills devoured their savings. Then they took the house. When Sarah passed, she took Kai's will to live with her. He ended up drifting, a ghost haunting the shoulder of the American highway, surviving on discarded cans of soup and the occasional $5 bill handed out by pitying truckers. It was a Tuesday in late November, right around 2 in the morning, when the silence of the desert was shattered. Kai was huddled beneath 3 moth-eaten wool blankets when he heard it. The unmistakable, syncopated potato-potato rhythm of a Harley-Davidson. But to Kai's trained ear, the rhythm was fatally flawed. It sounded like a death rattle. The engine was gasping, firing intermittently on the front cylinder while the rear was completely dead, coughing thick, unburned fuel into the exhaust. The heavy motorcycle limped into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the abandoned diner and stalled with a violent metallic clatter. Kai hesitated. People who rode heavy V-twins through the desert at 2 a.m. usually didn't want to be bothered. But the mechanic in him, the part of his soul that hadn't died with Sarah, couldn't ignore a broken machine. He pushed open the creaking aluminum door of his Airstream, grabbed a dying heavy-duty maglite, and stepped into the freezing wind. Standing next to the smoking motorcycle was a mountain of a man. He was easily 6'4", wearing heavy, scuffed engineer boots, faded denim, and a leather cut over a thick hoodie. As Kai's flashlight beam swept across the man's back, he saw the infamous 3-piece patch, the winged death head. The top rocker read Hell's Angels. The bottom rocker read California. The small square patch on the front identified him as a member of the legendary San Bernardino Charter, the Burdu chapter, the very birthplace of the club. The biker kicked the side of his massive 1978 shovelhead with a string of vicious, desperate curses. "Kicking it won't fix the pushrod, brother," Kai said, his voice raspy from disuse. The biker whipped around, a heavy steel crescent wrench suddenly gripped in his massive fist. His eyes were wild, red-rimmed from the wind, and something deeper. Panic. "Who the hell are you?" the biker growled, stepping into the dim light. His face was a map of scars and hard miles. A small patch on his chest read, "Jack." "Just a guy trying to sleep," Kai replied calmly, lowering the flashlight so it wouldn't blind the man. "But I know a collapsed lifter and a bent pushrod when I hear one. You lost compression in the rear jug about 2 miles back, didn't you? Sounded like a coffee can full of bolts." Jack froze, lowering the wrench a fraction of an inch. "Yeah. It started ticking outside needles. Now it's dead. You a mechanic." "Used to be," Kai said. stepping closer, the biting wind whipping his frayed coat. He looked at the smoking engine block. The heat radiating from it smelled of scorched 20W50 oil and desperation. "Where are you trying to get to?" Jack's broad shoulders slumped, the aggression suddenly bleeding out of him, leaving only a hollow exhaustion. "San Bernardino. And if I'm not there by 6 a.m., my brothers ride without me." "Ride where?" Jack looked away, staring into the pitch-black desert. "Cemetery. My little girl. She was 7. Leukemia. The club is leading the procession at dawn. I've been riding straight from a job in Colorado for 2 days. I promised her I'd be at the front." The desert wind seemed to stop for a fraction of a second. Kai felt a familiar, cold fist squeeze his chest. He knew the suffocating, helpless weight of watching disease steal someone you love. He looked at Jack not as a dangerous outlaw, but as a shattered father standing at the edge of the abyss. "Push it around back," Kai ordered, his voice suddenly carrying the sharp authority of a lead mechanic. "The wind is too harsh out here. Let's see what we can do." Jack looked at the homeless man, his unkempt grey beard and dirty clothes. Doubt flickered in his eyes. "You don't have parts. You don't have a shop." "I have a pair of hands and a brain," Kai fired back. "You want to bury your daughter, or you want to freeze out here arguing with a bum?" Without another word, Jack grabbed the handlebars, his massive arms flexing as he pushed the heavy 700-pound machine around the side of the diner, out of the howling crosswind. The back of the diner offered a small alcove shielded from the wind. Kai dragged out a rusted metal milk crate to use as a stool, and retrieved a filthy, heavy canvas bag from beneath his airstream. When he unzipped it, Jack's eyebrows raised. Inside, meticulously cleaned, oiled, and arranged, was a set of professional-grade snap-on tools. They were the only things of value Kai hadn't sold. They were his final tether to the man he used to be. "Hold the light," Kai commanded, tossing the mag light to the Hell's Angel. Jack obeyed, directing the beam onto the chrome pushrod tubes of the shovelhead engine. Kai's hands, though calloused and covered in street grime, moved with the surgical precision of a maestro. He unbolted the exhaust, removed the air cleaner, and cracked open the rear rocker box. The smell of burnt oil filled the cold air, working in the dim, yellow beam of the flashlight. Kai pulled the retaining clips. He slipped the pushrod tube down. "Just what I thought," Kai muttered. He pulled out the solid steel pushrod. It was severely bowed, shaped like a banana. Your lock nut backed off. The pushrod jumped the cup on the rocker arm and smashed itself against the housing. You're lucky it didn't snap and drop into the cam chest, or your entire engine would be a grenade right now. Jack stared at the bent rod, his jaw tight. "Can you bend it back?" "It's hardened steel, Jack," Kai said, glancing up. "If I hit it with a hammer cold, it'll shatter like glass, and even if I could straighten it, it's structurally compromised." "So I'm done," Jack whispered, the reality crashing down on him. The giant biker sat on the crumbling concrete, burying his face in his grease-stained hands. "I'm going to miss her funeral. I wasn't there when she passed. I was locked up. I promised I'd be there to put her in the ground." Kai stared at the broken piece of steel in his hand. He thought of Sarah. He thought of the promises he couldn't keep. A fierce, irrational determination ignited in his chest. "You're not missing that funeral," Kai said quietly. He stood up and walked to a pile of scrap metal he had collected for recycling. He dug through rusted rebar, old aluminum cans, and discarded car parts until he found it a thick steel tie rod from an old Ford pickup truck. "Get a fire going," Kai yelled over his shoulder. In that old oil drum. Use the dead sage brush and whatever trash you can find. Make it hot." For the next 3 hours, the back of the diner became a crude, primal forge. Jack kept a roaring fire burning in the 55-gallon drum. Kai used a pair of heavy vice grips to hold the thick Ford tie rod directly in the center of the coals, until the steel glowed a dull, angry cherry red. Using the flat top of a concrete bumper block as an anvil and a heavy ball-peen hammer from his kit, Kai began to forge. He was going to manufacture a custom solid pushrod from scratch, in the middle of the desert, in the dead of night. Clang, clang, clang. The rhythmic sound of metal on metal echoed across the empty expanse of Interstate 40. Sparks flew into the black sky. Sweat poured down Kai's face, freezing on his collar. Jack watched in absolute silence, recognizing the sheer mastery and desperate focus in the older man's movements. "Where did you learn to turn wrenches like this?" Jack asked softly, as Kai paused to measure the glowing metal against the bent original. "A lifetime ago." Kai didn't look up. "I had a shop in L.A. Wife got sick. Everything else went away. When you lose the reason you wake up in the morning, fixing cars seems pretty pointless." Jack nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of profound loss. "My old lady left when I caught my last charge. My little girl, Maya. She was the only pure thing I ever brought into this world. When I got the call from the hospital last week, I was in Denver. They said she had a few days. I rode through 2 blizzards. Didn't make it. The club. They held her hand at the end. The president of the charter, a guy named Snake. He sat with her so she wouldn't be alone. That's why I have to be there. I owe the club, and I owe her." Kai plunged the newly shaped steel rod into a bucket of dirty rainwater to quench it. A massive hiss of steam erupted, smelling of rust and ozone. "Let's see if it fits," Kai said, wiping the soot from his eyes. By 4:30 a.m., the temperature had dropped to a bitter 28 degrees. Kai's hands were bleeding from a slip of a wrench, his knuckles bruised, but the makeshift pushrod was seated perfectly in the lifter block. He meticulously adjusted the valve lash, tightening the lock nuts with exact torque by pure feel. "Button it up," Kai said, stepping back, completely exhausted. His back was screaming, and his chest heaved. Jack quickly bolted the rocker box cover back on and secured the exhaust pipe. He swung his heavy leg over the saddle. He turned the ignition key. The lights flickered on. Kai held his breath. If the clearance was even a millimeter off, the piston would smash the valve, and the engine would tear itself apart. Jack hit the starter button. The heavy starter motor whined, fighting the massive compression of the V-twin. Chug, chug, chug. Jack twisted the throttle, giving the carburetor a squirt of raw fuel. Bang! A flame shot out of the exhaust, and then a miracle. The engine roared to life, a perfect, steady, thunderous idle. Potato, potato, potato. Both cylinders firing flawlessly. The makeshift pushrod was holding. Jack killed the engine, the sudden silence heavy in the air. He stepped off the bike and walked over to Kai. The giant outlaw reached into his leather cut and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open. It was completely empty. "Brother," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "I burned my last dollar on gas in Kingman. I don't have a dime to pay you, but you just gave me my life back." Kai wiped his greasy hands on his pants and smiled. A genuine, tired smile. "I didn't do it for money. Jack, I did it for Maya. Ride safe. Keep the RPMs under 4,000. That steel isn't heat-treated perfectly. It might warp if you push it too hard. You'll make it to San Bernardino by dawn." Jack Callahan, a hardened sergeant-at-arms of the Hells Angels, stepped forward and wrapped his massive arms around the homeless mechanic in a bone-crushing hug. He smelled of sweat, leather, and gasoline. "I don't forget, Kai," Jack whispered fiercely. "And the club doesn't forget." Jack swung onto the bike, kicked it into gear, and roared out of the parking lot. Kai watched the solitary red taillight disappear down the dark ribbon of interstate, Fortu swallowed by the desert night. Kai packed his tools, crawled back into his freezing airstream, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, expecting absolutely nothing to come of it. He had done a good deed. That was enough. But he didn't know Jack Callahan, and he certainly didn't understand the absolute, unwavering code of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. The sun rose over the Mojave Desert like a bleeding wound, painting the cracked earth in harsh shades of violet and crimson. Inside his freezing airstream, Kai Pendleton groaned, his body aching from the brutal, makeshift blacksmithing he had performed hours earlier. His knuckles were swollen, caked in dried blood and black grease. He rolled over, pulling the moth-eaten blankets tighter to his chin, fully expecting another day of invisible, grinding poverty. Then the ground began to tremble. It didn't start as a sound. It started as a low-frequency vibration that rattled the cheap aluminum rivets of his trailer. Dust began to shake loose from the ceiling. A rusted coffee can on his makeshift counter vibrated off the edge, clattering to the linoleum floor. Kai sat up, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. The vibration grew into a sustained, deafening roar. It sounded like a squadron of heavy bombers flying at treetop level. The sheer volume of it was terrifying, shaking the very air inside his lungs. He scrambled to the small, hazy window of the airstream and wiped away the condensation. Pouring off the exit ramp of Interstate 40 was a river of chrome, black leather, and raw horsepower. It wasn't just one motorcycle. It was an army. They rode in a tight, disciplined stagger formation, filling the two-lane highway as far back as the eye could see. The morning sun violently glinted off ape-hanger handlebars and custom-painted gas tanks. Leading the pack was a massive wedge of riders wearing the unmistakable colors of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. The red and white winged deathheads were stark against the black leather vests. The bottom rockers read a geography of California's most notorious charters: San Bernardino, Oakland, Los Angeles, Ventura. Kai watched in stunned disbelief as the lead riders, a group of about 20 massive men, signaled and turned directly into the cracked, weed-choked parking lot of the abandoned diner. Behind them, hundreds more followed. The sheer mass of motorcycles flooded the lot, parking with military precision. The air instantly choked with the smell of exhaust, burning oil, and ozone. When they cut their engines simultaneously, the sudden silence was somehow louder than the roar. Kai swallowed hard. Had Jack crashed, had the makeshift pushrod failed, sending the shovelhead's engine into catastrophic failure, and now the club had come to exact vengeance on the mechanic who ruined the bike. The Hells Angels were fiercely protective of their own, and they did not forgive slights. A heavy knock slammed against the aluminum door of the airstream. It was a knock that demanded entry. Kai took a deep breath, grabbed a heavy wrench just in case, and pushed the door open. Standing there was Jack Callahan. He looked exhausted, his face grey with fatigue, but his eyes were bright. Next to him stood an older man with silver hair tied back in a bandana, a face carved from desert mahogany, and eyes as cold and calculating as a rattlesnake. His chest patch read, President. His name was Snake. Beyond them, 300 patched members stood in absolute, intimidating silence, staring directly at Kai's trailer. I told you I don't forget. Kai, Jack said, his voice carrying over the morning wind. Snake stepped forward. The president of the San Bernardino Charter radiated authority. He looked Kai up and down, taking in the dirty clothes, the grease-stained hands, and the desperate living conditions. Jack made it, Snake said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Rolled into the cemetery lot exactly 10 minutes before the procession started. That shovelhead of his sounded sweet, held together through 70 miles of high-speed interstate. Kai felt the tension bleed out of his shoulders. I'm glad. I told him to keep the RPMs down. He told us what you did, Snake continued, stepping closer. Told us you stood out in the freezing cold, forged apart from scrap steel, and didn't ask for a single dime. Jack got to say goodbye to Maya. He got to put his daughter in the earth because of you. In our world, a debt like that doesn't just get a handshake and a thank you. Before Kai could respond, the screech of tires interrupted them. A sleek, black Mercedes sedan, accompanied by 2 San Bernardino County Sheriff's cruisers, pulled aggressively onto the shoulder of the road, unable to enter the lot due to the blockade of motorcycles. The doors opened, and a man in a sharp, expensive suit stepped out, looking absolutely furious. Flanking him were 2 deputies, their hands nervously resting on their utility belts as they took in the sight of 300 Hell's Angels. What is the meaning of this? The man in the suit yelled, pushing his way through a gap in the bikes. This was Richard Sterling, the real estate developer who had recently bought the massive tract of land the diner sat on. Sterling pointed a manicured finger directly at Kai. I told you last week your time was up. I have the bulldozers coming at noon to level this cesspool, and you are trespassing deputies. Arrest this vagrant and tow that piece of trash trailer to the dump. Kai's stomach dropped. This was the twist of the knife he had been dreading for weeks. He had nowhere to go. If they took the airstream, he would be sleeping on the dirt. The deputies took a hesitant step forward, entirely unsure how to navigate an eviction in the middle of a massive Hell's Angels gathering. Hold on a second. Suit, Snake said, turning his back on Kai and facing the developer. The sheer physical presence of the club president stopped Sterling in his tracks. You're disturbing a private meeting. Private meeting, Sterling scoffed, trying to mask his fear with arrogance. This is private property, my property, and this bum is squatting on it. Snake didn't blink. He reached inside his heavy leather cut. The deputies tensed, but Snake didn't pull a weapon. He pulled a thick, manila envelope. Actually, Richard, Snake said, reading the developer's name off a document he slid out of the envelope. You were the owner, until 6 a.m. this morning. Sterling frowned. What are you talking about? My lawyer woke your partner up with a phone call, Snake explained smoothly, his eyes locking onto Sterling's. Made a cash offer on this specific parcel, the diner and the 3 acres behind it, at a 20% premium over market value. Your partner signed the electronic transfer an hour ago. The wire cleared. This land belongs to the San Bernardino Charter now. Sterling's face went pale. He pulled out his phone, rapidly dialing. He listened for a moment, his jaw dropping, before he hung up, utterly defeated. Deputies, Snake said, turning to the nervous law enforcement officers. Looks like Mr. Sterling is the one trespassing on private property now. I'd appreciate it if you escorted him off our land before my brothers get agitated." The deputies didn't need to be told twice. They gently but firmly guided the sputtering, furious developer back to his Mercedes. As the cars drove away, a massive, thunderous cheer erupted from the 300 bikers. The sound echoed off the desert mountains. Kai stood frozen in place, the desert wind slicing through him as if he weren't even there. The sheriff's cruisers had long since disappeared down the highway, dragging Richard Sterling's fury with them. But Kai couldn't look away from what he held in his hands. The manila envelope felt impossibly heavy, foreign against his grease-stained fingers. His eyes scanned the document again, disbelieving. A grant deed. Official. Stamped. Real. He skipped over the legal jargon, searching for the catch for the name of some corporation, some hidden clause that would explain this. But there was none. Just one name, typed clean and undeniable beneath the property lines. Kai Thomas Pendleton. His breath faltered. The paper trembled as the wind tugged at it. "I don't understand," he muttered, voice barely holding together. "Why me? I just fixed a bike. That's nothing." Snake stepped forward, the faint creak of leather cutting through the low rumble of idling engines. The gathered bikers fell silent, instinctively giving him space. His gaze was steady, sharp, not pitying, but measuring. "We don't reward nothing," Snake said. "We reward who a man is when he's got nothing left." He spoke of the call he'd received before dawn, of a broken machine brought back to life with scrap metal and fire, of skill that couldn't be faked. Then, more quietly, he spoke of Kai himself, of a past long buried, a master mechanic, a man who lost everything when his wife died, a man who didn't collapse, didn't rot, just disappeared. Hearing her name again nearly broke him. "But last night," Snake continued, voice softer now, "you chose to help. No money. No reason. Just because someone needed it." Before Kai could respond, the ground began to tremble. 3 massive tow trucks rolled into the lot, engines roaring, dust spiraling behind them. They lined up with precision, cutting through the sea of motorcycles. Then, like clockwork, men moved. Equipment, serious equipment, was unloaded piece by piece. Tool chests, lifts, compressors, welding rigs, a full shop, built in minutes. Kai stared, overwhelmed. "This place," Jack said beside him, grinning despite exhaustion, "is yours to run. A sanctuary on the road. For the first time in years." Kai felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not grief. Purpose. "We're setting you up." "Kai!" Jack yelled over the noise of grinding metal and shouting men. "We're calling it Pendleton's Custom and Repair. The deed is yours. The tools are yours. The business is yours. The club is just going to be your most loyal, highest-paying client." Kai watched as a group of heavily tattooed men kicked in the boarded-up double doors of the abandoned diner and began hauling the heavy equipment inside, sweeping out years of dust and broken glass. Within 20 minutes, the hollow shell of a ruined restaurant was being transformed into a high-end, professional custom motorcycle shop. The ghost he had been for 10 years was finally being laid to rest. Sarah wouldn't want him dying out here in the dirt. She would want his hands covered in oil, doing what he was born to do. Snake reached into the heavy leather saddlebag of his custom road glide and pulled out a thick, black hooded sweatshirt. He walked back to Kai, the deafening noise of the impromptu construction site roaring around them. On the front of the heavy cotton hoodie, in bold, unmistakable red and white block letters, It read, Support 81. San Bernardino. Only patched members wear the death head, Snake instructed, holding the garment out. But this is a different kind of armor. You put this on, you are officially under the umbrella of the Burdu Charter. If that developer comes back with a different judge, if local gangs try to shake you down, if the county tries to jam you up on permits, they look at your chest, and they know they aren't just dealing with a mechanic. Snake leaned in closer, his eyes burning with absolute, unwavering loyalty. They know they are dealing with 3,000 of us. Kai slowly reached out and took the hoodie. The fabric was heavy, thick, and warm. He pulled it over his head, settling it over his frayed, filthy coat. It felt like putting on a suit of armor. The freezing desert wind suddenly couldn't reach him anymore. He wasn't alone in the wasteland. He looked at Jack, then at Snake, and then at the hundreds of men clearing out his new shop. I don't know how to thank you, Kai choked out, wiping his eyes with the back of his bruised hand. I really don't. You don't say a damn word, Jack laughed, slapping Kai hard on the shoulder, the physical contact grounding him in reality. Jack pointed to the massive 1978 shovelhead sitting near the rusted airstream. You just get back to work. That pushrod is holding, but the valves are ticking, and I'm about 3,000 miles overdue for an oil change. The early morning sun finally broke free of the jagged horizon, flooding the Mojave Desert in brilliant, blinding gold. The light caught the chrome of 300 motorcycles, turning the abandoned lot into a sea of fire. It was no longer a graveyard of Kai's past. The homeless mechanic had surrendered his final ounce of strength to help a desperate father. And the universe, roaring on two wheels and wearing red and white, had returned the favor in blood, steel, and brotherhood. If this story of unexpected brotherhood and redemption hit home for you, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that good deeds never go unpunished or unrewarded. Subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories where the unlikeliest heroes step up. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Kai's worn-out shoes?